This is the big 5-0 where they're wrapping up the Savage Dawn storyline and really kind of wrapping up the whole truth stuff that's been happening for a year with Superman and all the super books. So this issue 50, it's an oversized issue written by Gene Yang. We've got art by a few people, but mainly Howard Porter and Ardian Syaf. And here we have picking up of the last Superman book, so Action 50, we actually see how Superman gets his powers and his suit back with some help from the Fortress of Solitude. And then in Superman Wonder Woman 27, we have some fighting basically going on with Wonder Woman kind of leading the fight against Vandal's kids, and Superman going off to take on Vandal Savage himself. In this issue, we've got basically just the final showdown with Vandal Savage and Superman, and it ends up kind of being more a battle of wits than a battle of might. Vandal Savage gives some alternative realities, and Vandal Savage is kind of trying to make this point that you sort of need a dictator, or you need Vandal Savage to actually sort of lord over everybody. If he had done that, he would have saved Krypton. If Vandal Savage can lord over Earth, he can save the Earth from its future dangers. And if you defeat Vandal Savage and don't let this happen, there's going to be some kind of danger that will overtake the Earth. So he tries to make these sort of psychological points to Superman. Superman's not having it. That gives us the kind of big conclusion. So big issue here, wrapping some things up. We haven't been thrilled with everything leading up to it, but how do you think it came together at the end?
Well, I didn't mind it. I thought it was a lot tighter than some of the issues had been. I'm always a big fan of kind of alternate realities or different timelines for Superman, because it's just a way for him to kind of look in the mirror at different ways he could be if he kind of succumbed to being more of a bad guy, or things worked out differently with him and various members of his supporting cast. So I like that aspect of it. I thought the art by Porter was a little better than it has been. But it's suffering a bit from that crossoveritis, where if you're not reading every issue of what's going on in the Savage Dawn, then you're kind of missing out on some of the story. But that being said, where things end up, I don't mind it, and it's a fairly, I guess, interesting conclusion to everything. But I still think that Gene Yang is a way better writer than this for kind of his little run on Superman here, and I think that he could have done something a little more memorable when it's all said and done.
Yeah, I think you're probably right about that. This was kind of a serviceable conclusion. It wrapped some things up. Overall, I feel like, the truth stuff didn't quite do what I think it could have done. And they tried to tie it together with Vandal Savage, but I think a little bit of that was sort of like writing it from the back end instead of sort of like having it really well planned out and set up from the beginning.
Yeah.
And that was how I felt a little bit with this issue, was like they were trying to have these big, it's a big decision point for Superman, and Vandal Savage is kind of trying to tempt him with this other, this power and stuff. And I didn't really feel like that I had been set up for that from the last several issues. I feel like they tried to just do it in this issue. And I was, again, I hate to do this, but to kind of contrast it with Batman, Batman, when he has his, dialogue with the Joker, like every line has so much meaning because it's all been set up by the story.
Yeah.
Or when Gordon has his decision, it's like, wow, the whole story has been about like Gordon having to make this decision.
Yeah.
In this one, I just feel like I get jerked around where like it's going one way, but then the next issue it tries something else, and then here at the end it's like, well, let's try this third thing, which is maybe it's going to be Vandal Savage tempting him with this whatever. And maybe they're trying to do like, maybe they were riffing on the idea of power, so like they depowered Superman, then he gets his powers back, and now Vandal Savage is trying to say like, you need to be even more powerful and like a dictator to be right, and Superman's like, no, I'm like just fine how I am. But I felt like the monologue at the beginning, like there was this internal monologue on the first few pages, I didn't feel like it was really ringing true to what we had been reading coming up to it. And it took a while to get going. And even the dialogue between him and Vandal, I felt like was kind of generic. I don't feel like it was really dialogue for this story. I felt like it was sort of dialogue between a hero and a villain, and you could have put it anywhere.
Yeah, I would say I agree with everything you said there. Like, it seems like a lot of this arc, and even a lot since the end of the little bit of the Jeff John run, which didn't really feel finished either, is like that they kind of had some mandates, and they're like, okay, well, here's this big storyline that's going to cross over with all the titles about Superman, his identity being outed, so just go with that. And then right after that, you're going to another big crossover about Vandal Savage and all the stuff that with Horder Root kind of mixes in with it. I think it's just too much. and also it wasn't like too much all done by the same team where they had a beginning, middle, and end in mind. Some of it seems like they were kind of spitballing a lot of it and figuring it out as they went along, and
Yeah.
that's not necessarily a good thing for a comic book sometimes.
Yeah, I'm pretty confident now, like how this kind of played out, because I've seen in interviews with some of the creative team and stuff that the executives and the editors, they did tell the Superman writers, you have to do something to shake up Superman, change something about him at his core or whatever. And then they said with Greg Pak and some of them, they said like, well, since we have to do something, we will like depower him and we will reveal his identity. And the editorial's like, okay, good, try that. That'll be a big shakeup. And so then they started the ball rolling on that to bring Gene Yang in, and like I think Gene Yang had some ideas. Like I think he had these ideas about the Filipino hero,
Deathmatch or whatever.
yeah, the idea of the myth brawling with those ancient heroes or their legends still being kept alive, and he probably had some ideas maybe about Hoarder Root and like the identity and technology stuff. But I think Gene Yang's mistake was he had those ideas which could have been good, but he tried to still fold them in this other thing that was being dictated from the overall Superman team.
Yeah, totally.
So it's like, okay, like Gene Yang, you probably should have left your idea to the side and just come up with a new idea that somehow fit in with what you had to do because you're under contract to do this. And now we're getting the end of that where it's like, okay, he was trying to still bring his threads along, but they didn't really weave together with all of it because I think they were, like you said, it was kind of different ideas thrown together rather than a sort of unified plan from the beginning.
Totally. And like they jumped over huge storytelling opportunities, like kind of in the vein of the old Superman movies. If Lois Lane found out Clark Kent was Superman, and there could have been this whole great storyline with him like, okay, well, I'm going to do all sorts of crazy stuff so people won't remember I'm Superman. Like ridiculous things like spinning the earth around backwards or something crazy. I mean, once it's on the internet, it doesn't matter who you are, you can't really fix it. But they could have done things to make that really like its own thing. Like that should have been a trade that someone could pick up and be like, this is a whole story about Superman's identity being outed and how that would affect him and Metropolis and pretty much the whole country, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think they kind of missed out on a few things.
Yeah, I think you're right. And that's probably goes back to the creative process. Like if they would have said, here's the idea, now let's make a story that's really rooted in the core of his identity being revealed. But instead it's like they said, hey, let's have his identity be revealed and then let's still try to tell these other stuff, rather than just really digging into the moment of his identity being revealed and going with that.
Totally.
So we do have it wrapped up, and I mean, it does kind of come to a conclusion. So at least, okay, we've got to the end of this phase, and at least it's not still like all over the place. They did try to wrap it back together. And I think it is interesting where this issue leaves it. They leave it with, I thought it was kind of nice that Superman, realizes there's some conscience involved in Puzzler, and that might be a Gene Yang touch of like this Puzzler character who's kind of mechanical and robotic and, digital. He has a conscience, it seems like, so that's kind of an interesting idea.
Yeah.
And Superman wins him over, and that's how they're able to kind of get their victory. But then we end up with Superman and Lois kind of getting reunited, at least having an understanding of each other and getting over their sort of animosity, or Superman's kind of able to forgive Lois. And then the last couple pages are cool because Jimmy, Lois, and Superman are together, and when Superman hears trouble... Clark hears trouble, and Clark can actually just stand up and then rip off his shirt in front of a whole room, like a restaurant of people.
Yeah.
So that's kind of an interesting new place to be, because now we have Clark, who his identity is out there, so he can actually just go ahead and head right towards the danger, and he doesn't need to try to hide and scurry off to the side.
Yeah, like I like that for now, but I think that's a genie they're going to put back in the bottle for this rebirth thing, I think, because it seems to be something that's really integral to the Superman mythos. I remember when it happened to Spider-Man years ago, it was the same kind of thing. There was an issue where Aunt May found out where he was or who he was, and that was kind of cool because it was an accident. But during the whole Civil War thing, Spider-Man revealed his identity to the whole world in a news conference, and they did this crazy thing later where Doctor Strange made it like it never happened because it just wasn't the same for the character after. So I'm interested to see what they do with Superman with that, because I think it's something that is huge and kind of important to have that alter ego,
Yeah, so we might get this Super League story, which will be the last few issues here before Rebirth.
Yeah.
I'll be curious to see if they do play with that idea of showing some familiar scenes, but instead of him having to go off to a phone booth or, go and preserve his identity, he can actually just be like, okay, I'm Clark and I'm also Superman and here I come. We'll get maybe 4 issues to play around with that. I do think it's kind of cool to see it, but you're right. Long term with Rebirth, probably part of Rebirth is to put the secret identity back in place.
Yeah, and also, I mean, something we talked about earlier, Superman's main weakness, because unless you've got kryptonite, is his, people in his life. So if everyone knows he's
Hmm.
Clark Kent, why aren't people already trying to kill all his coworkers and friends
Hmm.
and family? So to me, if they're going to leave that aspect in there, then they've got to do a story with that too.
Yeah, they've pretty much only had like one issue, I think, that did that, which
Hmm.
was a Superman issue where the kind of group came and was trying to take down the Daily Planet because they knew that that was gonna get at Superman.
Yeah,
But really, that should have been like the heart of a whole arc, not just like
totally.
half of one
Yeah.
issue.
I think
Yeah.
finishing up like a lot of these things, we always talk about the Batman and the way Capullo and Snyder are approaching it, but I think they approach stuff as a story first, and then if something happens in the story that's a cool idea, then they add it in there, not
Hmm.
vice versa, where they're like,
Hmm.
"Hey, we're going to tell everyone that Batman is Bruce Wayne, and then what do we do next?" You know?
Hmm. Yeah. All right. Well, this is the end of a chapter. We have a Super League Superman crossover, so it's not just going to be in Superman. It's going to go through some of the other super books. But then it's really only a couple months till Rebirth hits at the end of May, and then we'll have to see what's up. I'm excited for a possible new chapter in Superman. It could be some good stuff.
Yeah, me too. I mean, and it could end up being that we end up reading action more than Superman, depending which is the better title. So I'm looking forward
Hmm.
to kind of a new starting point for the character. I think it's good for him.
Yeah, and if one of those two books, Action or Superman, is really high quality, it's going to be coming out twice a month, which I think will be cool.
Yeah, that'll be nice too. As long as they can keep the quality up with that schedule, then I'm all for that as well.